So I started to have a little bit of a think today about therapy, like not coaching or counselling, but therapy, the actual therapeutic process, and how there is a possibility that, not a possibility, there's a definite factor of ego that gets in there. The ego of the therapist, like if they want to be right, if they want to be in control, if they want to sort of role play this floating eye that's analyzing you from on high and taking notes and not sharing those notes, that kind of weird thing. And then the ego of the client as well, who has a view of what the problem is and wants to be right and maybe doesn't want to let go of their ideas about what's gone on in the situation and can't have the humility for there to be any change, right? I had this thought that I could see how it quickly could go from well, here I am, I've shown up to get help with my issue, and I'm just looking for some advice, and I just want to move on with my life, and I just want to get help, into a game that becomes like a battle between me and you, you and I, over who's right and who's wrong in the situation. And that maybe there's some things we could look at doing that reduces that. And maybe if we look with intent at what is necessary for therapy to work, just some ideas, but I just want to float some ideas by you, basically. Could you imagine walking into a therapy session and having to say, first and foremost, my thinking about the subject is wrong, and I know in all humility that what I'm doing is wrong, and therefore I need you to help me because the way that this is not working for me, it's wrong, and I need help. Would that change things? Would that make a big difference? So maybe there's a space for just sort of softening deliberately and saying, oh, okay, before we get into you versus me, you and I battling over who's right and who's wrong, can we soften the ego first? Is there something we could do that would cause that to happen? Hello, and welcome to our therapy session today. Thank you for coming. Let's run an experiment. Think of something that's bothering you that you would want to see a coach or a counsellor or a therapist for. If it's appropriate, say it out loud. Make one sentence. Turn it into one sentence and be like, this is the thing that I need help with. Or if it's not appropriate, and you're listening on the bus or on the train, write it in your notes. What one thing would you see a counsellor or a therapist for? Like, I can't get over my ex-wife, or I have anxiety when I think about studying for my exams, or whatever it is, right? So you make it one sentence. So that's step one. Turn that thing into a sentence. Now, step number two, say or write down, I don't know what I'm doing about X, about this subject that is the subject of sentence number one. I don't know what I'm doing, because if I did, then I would have fixed it, and I clearly don't. I don't know what I'm doing is your second step. Then your third step is to say, I've tried to fix, and all of my attempts were wrong. So I was wrong. I didn't know what to do, and I don't know what to do. And then the fourth step is just check in with yourself and go, how does that make me feel? How does it make me feel to go, I don't know what I'm doing about that. I actually need help about that. I demonstrated to myself, to my satisfaction, that I'm wrong. And now I'm here seeking help because I don't know what to do. And that's where we're starting from. My hypothesis is that if we deliberately put humility back into the system, we do two things. One, we take away the natural conflicting element of the therapeutic process, the natural element of conflict. There are two humans, there are two egos, they're in a room. And because of the context, it becomes like tennis, it becomes like boxing, it becomes like some competitive sport. Nobody means for it to be that way. It's just that, whether you're the coach or the therapist or the client in this scenario, the dumb shaved monkeys that we kind of lean towards playing dominance games, whether we want to or not. That's just the way it goes. So before you know it, you're playing ping pong over your depression. You're playing tennis over your anxiety. You're in a boxing match with your coach, with your therapist, over the dynamics of the grieving process, or whether you're doing the right kind of work to help you to grieve for the death and the loss of your last relationship, as an example of a common thing that people would see a coach or a counselor for. So number one, the humility takes away from that dynamic. It reminds us consciously and with intent, look, this is just a conversation between two adults. It's not surgery. I'm not under general anesthetic. Nobody can cut the anxiety out of me. So it kind of reminds us that it's like a Socratic process. It's like philosophy. In fact, we already know, it's known that you can trace the roots of psychology back to philosophy. But this dynamic of two people talking, is that not the essence of a philosophical method? Is that not like the Socratic method? You're basically debating with the hope that you're going to have a positive outcome. So it also, as well as taking away from this ego versus ego fight, it also reminds us that this is not magic, and this is just a conversation between two consenting adults where it is presumed that we have the same goal in mind, which is to feel better at the end of it, right? The second thing that I think bringing this level of humility in is it kind of moves the ego out of the way. And when I say ego in this context, obviously it is implicit. I'm not talking about the healthy ego. I'm talking about that side of the self that clings to dominance, that wants to be right, that wants to be in charge, that wants to be in control, that secretly loathes the therapeutic process, secretly loathes the humbling of having to come and ask another adult for help with a part of life that one part of the ego is going to be going, you should be able to do this. And if we remind ourselves of our Sanskrit, that side of the ego is the ahamkara. In Sanskrit, it was the ahamkara. It is the ahamkara spoken of in Hinduism and Buddhism. That's the ego that we don't want. The good ego that is vibrant and thriving and provides us healthy boundaries with people, that's like the Freudian healthy ego. The ego that we're talking about here is more of a Vedic, Eastern concept of ego that we should really use another word, which is the ahamkara, which means the I am maker. And it is implicit in that Sanskrit word that what is brought with it is dominance and illusion and delusion. Basically delusions of grandeur. Basically some of the essential elements of narcissism. What I'm saying here is that your intrinsic narcissism, which everybody has, these narcissistic traits, they can be healthy narcissistic traits and then they can be unhealthy narcissistic traits. And my unhealthy narcissism stops the therapeutic process from working. So in these two ways, I would suggest that humility could really help move the therapeutic process forward. Also, if you do that, say if you had to say at the beginning of a session, like maybe you have to say at the beginning of a session, I've come here today, this is way more religious. This is the kind of thing that people would see a Buddhist priest for in Thailand. I remember years ago, back in 2009, trying to describe when I was living in Thailand to people using English and bits and pieces of Thai words, what I did for a living. And so, back then, it's way more common now. They just had no idea. Like 11, 12 years ago, it just wasn't really a known thing. But there was something that was a whole therapeutic process that you could go through with the Buddhist monks. You'd go to the temple and you would tell them your problem, and they would find pieces of Buddhist scripture that applied to your problem, and then they would offer you certain meditations and certain prayers to do and certain pieces of scripture to remember. And you might be invited to go on retreat where you'd wear white. You would be invited to sweep the temple. You'd be invited to meditate every day, and then that would deal with the problem. And there is a specific role a monk can take, and I can't remember the Thai properly, but it's something like Pradwatidawai. That's the monk that you go to see when you have a problem, and he gives you a specific sutra and specific lessons and specific meditations. Not a million miles away from what would happen in Catholicism with a Catholic priest. So you have that humility there. So you go in and you go, look, this is my problem. And then the therapist, priest, coach says, what? What's your problem? Say it in a sentence. The philosopher. Say it in a sentence. What is your problem? And then you go back and forth on formulating a really good sentence that really gets to the essence. Because your sentence of what your problem is going to be wrong. My sentence, when I define my problem, if the person's good, they're going to help me to redefine the initial sentence, right? And that's a big part of the therapeutic process. So I'd say this is my problem. We both agree. We get to this point. We both have, this is my problem. What do you want instead of that problem? Well, I don't want to be anxious when I'm thinking about doing my work for my exams. I want to be able to do the work for the exams. I want to be able to perform well. Why? So that I can get my good degree at university and so that I can go and live a life that looks like this. Can you tell me what that life would look like? Yes. Can you see how living that life would be directly connected to you being able to get through the exam process now? Yes. Okay. Is everything congruent? Are there any breaks? Is there anything that's dangerous here? You check for all that, right? So then you'd start purifying your intent. You would, as the coach, you'd purify the intent of the client, but you would, through this process, also purify your intent as the coach, as the counselor, as the therapist. Where are we going? Like, you've got to be in charge of the process. Where are you taking the client? The two of you have to go together in a certain sense in order to get this job done, right? So then you'd have the client say, I've already tried to fix the sentence, the issue, and I failed. I clearly have demonstrated to myself that I don't know what I'm doing and I need some help, please. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to take that help, and I'm willing to change. I'm willing to change. I'm willing to change. And then you check in with the client and go, how does that make you feel? Like, is that true for you? Do you feel massive resistance? Do you feel uncomfortable? Does it make you feel ashamed? Does it make you feel humiliated? Does it make you feel guilty? Because I get guilt all the time. So if I'm dealing with clients who've come from a bad family background, a narcissistic family unit, and they start talking about that, they'll feel guilt because of the indoctrination and the slave mentality brainwashing, which is you don't talk about master. You can't talk in treacherous terms to the enemy, because I would always be the enemy, because I'm outside of the cult, you don't tell tales about what we do inside this cult, so there'd be guilt. So you'd have to work through that as well. You'd have to do some work around that. And then you can say, do we both agree that what we're going to work on right now is taking you from a place where you feel anxious when you think about doing your exams to a place where you would feel better? It's not going to be magical. We're not going to do it in one session, but where we want to feel better about doing the exams. Are there some skills we can work on, some strengths we can work on? Should we look at where there might be some unconscious resistance? Because who knows, maybe deep down, you're terrified that if you pass your exams and actually become an architect, a doctor, a vet, that people are going to make even more demands on you, and it's that distant day that you're really scared of. Or you don't really want to get over your ex-wife because you're frightened of making yourself vulnerable again and getting out there again. Because if you get over your ex-wife, she's like a talisman that you're, a fetish that you're holding on to, a talisman that keeps you protected from making yourself vulnerable again. Maybe the real fear is you don't want to get back out there again and face potential rejection, so on and so forth, however you do your work. My point here is humility is key, and the humbling of going, I don't know, and I need help, is really key for that level of vulnerability in the relationship, for the therapeutic relationship to be effective and to move forward. But if you don't have rapport and you don't trust your therapist and you don't trust your coach, you're not going to want to go there. If you can't do any of the steps I just gave you, you either need to think about changing your coach or your therapist, or you need to save your money and go home and actually think about this, not psychologically, but philosophically, and just ask, do I really, when I take my problem and I take that sentence and I convert it from this is what I don't want into this is what I want instead. When you look at the this is what I want instead, how do you feel? Check in with your emotional literacy. If you're terrified, you don't really want that. If you're riddled with guilt or shame, then you don't really want that. You've got to check in with your emotions, and no amount of therapy, nobody can change that. No amount of talking about it, no amount of just talking about it that doesn't penetrate that problem is going to allow you to move forward. So if you do therapy that's around and around the houses, this is how people end up doing therapy that lasts 10 years and making tiny bits of micro progress. That's, to me, is crazy, because you're not really getting to the nub of the problem, which is what's the real problem behind the problem. And I suspect that transcending the ego, which sounds really pompous and mystical and like you'd need some chanting or some drugs or something to do it, but you don't. You could just transcend the ego with some simple verbal interactions with the therapist, which you take seriously, or you do semi-seriously with a semi-sincere state, and be like, yeah, I've tried to do this, it didn't work, and I really need some help. I hope that was useful. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention with that one. We do have a new course, a free course that's out. If you join the mailing list below, you'll be the first to get all 10 parts of that course. And if you join the mailing list, you'll also get the PDFs that go with it. It's free to use, it's free to share, do what you will with the material, just please credit me. Again, thank you for your time and for your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Oh, last thing, there's another cool video for you to check out. If you go here, this is a video that if you enjoyed this one, you're going to like that one too. Cheers.